What is going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. This is the channel where we sit down and cover different comic book stories from Marvel, DC, and even IDW as well. This time we are going to jump back over to Marvel Comics, and we are going to begin to cover the Brian Michael Bendis Daredevil run. This is one of the most celebrated runs on the Daredevil comics. Honestly, one of my favorite runs on the character. Now, there is another story that comes before this one, but we are going to skip over that one only because I really want to cover this story. This is the story where we see the death of the Kingpin, or maybe not. But this story really pulled me in to read more of Brian Michael Bendis' run, because this story does end on a cliffhanger, but to me an amazing cliffhanger. And so if you like today's comic book video, please leave me a like down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. But I do hope you enjoy today's video. Now, Brian Michael Bendis starts his run off with a crazy opening because we pick up with a guy named Sam Silk, and this is a new character that was made by Brian Michael Bendis for this story. Now, we see Sam talking to someone in the shadows about how much of a failure this other person is. We learn that person Sam is talking to is the Kingpin. Now, at this point, the Kingpin is blind because of a previous story where a character named Maya Lopez blinded him. But you have Sam Silk tell Kingpin that he is no longer a man that anyone is scared of because Kingpin has been beaten down by superheroes so many times it is not even funny anymore. Now we learn that there is some connection between the Kingpin and Sam because the Kingpin knows Sam's father. Apparently, Kingpin let Sam work in New York because of how close Kingpin is with Sam's father. Except you had Sam Silk tell Kingpin that it is time for a change, and this is where things get crazy because Kingpin brought a small army as protection since he is blind now. He can't fight, except we learn that these guys are working for Sam Silk actually, and they start to stab the Kingpin over and over again, that somehow Sam Silk was able to make Kingpin's men switch sides. And it seems that Kingpin is now dead. And this is only the opening scene. Now this is where the story jumps back 1 week before the death of the Kingpin, where we pick up with Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, in court. Now this is him dealing with a case where a company called the Worldwide Corporation made a product that was not approved to be sold in stores. Except they had false papers where they said they were approved to sell their products. And this certain chemical product was aimed for teenagers. Except when it got in the hands of some teenagers, those teenagers died. And so you had the family hire Matt Murdock to help sue the company because after the teenagers died, there was proof that shows it was the drugs that killed these teenagers. And Worldwide Corporation tried to sue the parents of the teenagers for slander. And so it is Matt Murdock helping these parents out with their case. Now we pick up at the court where we learn that Matt Murdock won the case, and so it seems that another normal day for Matt Murdock and his partner Foggy Nelson, except this leads to a random character appearing outside the court. As soon as Matt and Foggy are about to get inside their limo, this guy calls out to Matt Murdock and he uses his powers to cause a huge explosion. Now this character is Nitro, whose power is that he can make himself a bomb. Now with that explosion happening, it throws Matt Murdock's senses all over the place. Remember, Matt Murdock is blind, but his other senses were enhanced, and right now they are making it hard for him to move around. Now you have Matt Murdock check up on Foggy, and of course he is okay. And so you have Matt Murdock change into his Daredevil outfit and try to chase down Nitro. And since his other senses are going crazy at the moment, well, it is making it hard for Daredevil to track Nitro down. but after a while he is able to find him. Now when he does, you have Nitro blast Daredevil away again. But you have Nitro say something that is important. Someone told Nitro if he does this, Daredevil will appear. And Nitro is wondering how that person knew, and where you have Daredevil come back around to continue to fight Nitro. Now, we don't learn who told Nitro this piece of information about Matt Murdock and Daredevil having close ties. The reason why is because you have these two police officers appear out of nowhere, because they got a call about Daredevil beating up on a man. And so they don't know the whole story about what Nitro did. But you have Daredevil basically leave and tell the officers that Nitro is guilty for what happened at the courthouse. Also warns one of the officers that if he ever shoots a gun so recklessly again, he will beat this officer down because this officer could have killed someone. This leads to Matt Murdock checking up on Foggy Nelson at the hospital since he was hurt at the courthouse. Now this is where Foggy Nelson tells us that the Kingpin knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. Honestly, I don't remember how, but the point is, at this point in Marvel Comics, Kingpin knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. Because you have Matt Murdock tell Foggy that Nitro did not come to the courthouse to go after him as Daredevil, but came after him as Matt Murdock. Someone is trying to kill Matt Murdock, and maybe because they know he is Daredevil, and the one person who would do that is the Kingpin. But you have Matt leave the hospital to see if it was the Kingpin. This leads to Daredevil going to see the Kingpin, and remember that this is 1 week ago before Kingpin was killed, but you have Daredevil tell the Kingpin about what happened at the courthouse and ask why the Kingpin tried to kill Matt Murdock. Where you have the Kingpin tell Daredevil he has no idea what he's talking about, and Daredevil used his senses to realize that Kingpin is not lying. Kingpin has no idea about the bombing at the courthouse, but then you have Daredevil realize that the Kingpin has a new man on his team, which is Sam Silk. And so we know that Sam Silk was part of the Kingpin's team a week before Kingpin was killed, except you have Daredevil leave to figure out who was behind the bombing at the courthouse. Now this leads to the story jumping back 3 months ago, where we pick up with Sam Silk in his first day working for the Kingpin. This is where we learn that the Kingpin and Sam Silk's father used to be best friends, and they used to work together years ago trying to make a name for themselves in the underworld of crime. Now Sam tells the other men of the Kingpin that his goal is to work in Hell's Kitchen, where you have the other men laugh at him for trying to take on Hell's Kitchen because of Daredevil. But at the end of this section of the story, we see Richard Fisk, the Kingpin's son, is there as well, but he usually sits alone at the bar and does not talk to anyone at all. But he will play a very important role down the road. This is where we pick up in the present day, where we pick up with Ben Urich, who is a reporter for the Daily Bugle, and he is very important in the Daredevil line of comics, but also he knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, except he gets a call where he learns that the Kingpin is dead. Now we pick up with Matt Murdock, and this is where I'm going to say it must take place in the present day, because we pick up with Matt Murdock going to his office, where he sees a letter on his desk, when he comes to find out that it is from Elektra, letting us know that she is going to play a role in Brian Michael Bendis' run. But she tells him someone has a bounty on his head, and she is telling him he needs to be careful. Where we see him go to his window and he sees someone has a sniper on him waiting to shoot him. And so of course you have Matt Murdock switch into his Daredevil outfit and goes after this guy. But honestly, this is just to show Daredevil continuing to find out more clues that point out that there is a bounty on his head. Because when you have Daredevil knock out this first guy who tried to snipe him, Matt Murdock finds a picture and a letter on him that says there is a huge bounty on Matt Murdock's head. Now this is showing that if this one guy here is out hunting for Matt Murdock for that bounty, then that means other people will come after Matt Murdock. And that is when we see what seems to be Boomerang was going to hunt down Matt Murdock as well. Except Daredevil saw him and of course chased him down as well. But just like the sniper from earlier, when Daredevil catches him, he finds the letter about the bounty on Matt Murdock's head. Now the most important part actually comes right after Daredevil is trying to get information out of Boomerang about who put the bounty on his head. Except that is when Daredevil sees Bullseye. Bullseye is Daredevil's worst enemy and the one who has done a lot of damage in Daredevil's life. But of course, when he goes to find Bullseye in the crowd, he's gone. But this is showing that Bullseye is even coming after Daredevil as well. This leads to us going over to Switzerland, where we pick up with Vanessa Fisk. And this is her finding out that her husband, the Kingpin, is dead. Now this is where you have Brian Michael Bendis change things for us in this story, but for a good reason for later stories, because we learn that the Kingpin is not dead. He is alive, but on life support basically. Where you have his lawyer Denny and his doctor Rogan basically tell Vanessa that the reason why he told the newspapers the Kingpin is dead so Sam Silk and his men don't come back again to finish the job. Now they don't know it was Sam Silk and Kingpin's own men who did this. The goal is now to move the Kingpin somewhere else while they figure out who did this and get revenge. Now this leads to 3 months ago, where we pick up with Sam Silk first joining the Kingpin's crew, where you have the Kingpin doing the introduction into his crime family. But we learn something very important. We learn that Sam's father is the Kingpin in Chicago, but sent his son Sam away for messing up out there to New York, but told Sam to ask the Kingpin for a favor, to get rid of Matt Murdock. This is where we learn that the court case Matt Murdock was working on earlier in this video about the company putting that product out there that killed teenagers, Sam's father was helping that company, but Sam's father was hoping that the Kingpin would help out to get rid of Matt Murdock. Except Kingpin says no because he knows Matt is Daredevil and does not want anyone to touch him. Now jumping forward in time, but 2 days before the present day, where the Kingpin is on life support, we actually pick up with Daredevil going to a bar to gather some information on who put the bounty on Matt Murdock's head, where he learns from one guy that it was the Kingpin who did it. Except what this guy tells Daredevil is crazy. He tells Daredevil that the Kingpin put the bounty out there, but doesn't want the world to know it was him, stating that a third party came in and put the bounty on Matt Murdock's head and pretended it was someone else who wanted Matt dead. This leads to Matt Murdock going over to the Kingpin again about what he just learned, except this is where you have the Kingpin tell Daredevil again that he has no idea what he is talking about, that he was not the one who put the bounty on his head. And Daredevil can tell again that the Kingpin is not lying, which means that one of the Kingpin men is doing things under the Kingpin's nose without the Kingpin's permission. The question is, who? But the story jumps back 2 months before the Kingpin went on life support, and we pick up with Sam Silk. This is where you have Sam Silk playing poker with some of the top head people who work under the Kingpin, where you have him talking about the fact that the Kingpin doesn't want anyone touching Matt Murdock. And Sam wants to know why, because Sam's father sent him here to get rid of the lawyer, where you have the men of the Kingpin tell Sam that because Matt Murdock is Daredevil, letting us know that even the people working under the Kingpin know that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. But there is a rule: no one can touch the lawyer no matter what. And Sam asks why, and they tell him to go talk to Richard Fisk, the son of the Kingpin. Now, this chapter closes on a story jumping back over to the present day, where we pick up with Vanessa Fisk talking to Deanie about her son. She asks if her son had a hand in what happened to her husband, that Richard Fisk tried to kill his own father. Now, this leads to the present day, where we see Daredevil meeting up with Ben Urich about the Kingpin supposedly being dead. Remember, Kingpin's lawyer told the world that the Kingpin was dead, but we know he is not. Now, Daredevil and Ben think that the Kingpin is not truly dead. He's out there somewhere recovering. But you also have Daredevil state that with the Kingpin supposedly being dead, but also the fact that people have been coming after Matt Murdock, it means someone else out there knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. This is where we jump back over to Sam Silk and Richard Fisk 2 months in the past, right after Sam Silk learns that Daredevil is Matt Murdock, but also the fact that the Kingpin and his men all knew. Now, this is where you have Sam Silk ask Richard Fisk, why don't anyone try to go after Matt Murdock? And Richard says because his father doesn't want them to. Now, the reason why Richard is talking to Sam is because they used to be best friends since their fathers used to work together when they were just starting out in the crime underworld. And Richard even says that the Kingpin men won't listen to him, but they will listen to Sam, stating that Sam could be able to convince the men of the Kingpin to actually go over Kingpin's head and actually kill Matt Murdock. This is where we pick up 1 month before the attack on the Kingpin, where we see Sam Silk meet up with top level people of the Kingpin. These 5 men are the ones who own the different crime families in the city who report to the Kingpin, except you have Sam convince these men to help him and work together to basically take down the Kingpin. This is where we learn how Sam was able to get these men to help him. But he basically says how Kingpin has grown soft because he won't kill Daredevil. But you also have Sam point out how there are more of them than Kingpin, meaning that technically all the men working for the Kingpin can easily overtake him. Then the story jumps forward 3 days after Sam was able to convince some other higher ups to go after the Kingpin, but before the Kingpin was put on life support, where we learned that Sam and Richard were the ones who put the bounty on Matt Murdock's head. Remember that Sam only came here to New York because his father told him to get rid of Matt Murdock for the company that Matt is trying to get rid of. Except Sam now knows that Matt is Daredevil, but also the fact that we learned that Sam and Richard tell this broker who tells assassins about the current bounty that the Kingpin wants Matt Murdock dead. Remember that in the present day, Matt was told it was the Kingpin who put the bounty out, but was done by a third party to make it seem like it wasn't the Kingpin. Well, it was Sam and Richard pretending to be the third party so it won't get traced back to them. But getting back to the present day, we pick up with Vanessa King, where we pick up with Vanessa King telling Kingpin's doctor and lawyer to take him to Switzerland to get him back to health. She is going to stay here in New York to get revenge for her husband. Now we pick back up the next day after Sam and the men of the Kingpin celebrating because they got rid of the Kingpin. And these men think that they are now untouchable since the Kingpin is gone. But you had Sam kind of taking the Kingpin spot, and the rest of the gang are okay with him being in charge of the group. But this leads us back over to Daredevil and Ben Urich talking to each other about the possible death of the Kingpin, where they don't believe that the Kingpin is dead and he's still out there somewhere. The question is where. But then you have Daredevil basically smell one of the letters of the bounty, where he smells chalk on it, where you have Ben Urich basically tell Kingpin about a broker named Falzone who worked out a billiard joint a while back. And so with that information, you have Daredevil go to Falzone's place to see if he can learn who put the bounty on his head. We know it was Sam and Richard who placed the bounty. Now here comes the beginning of the big kicker of this book, because when Daredevil goes to Falzone's place to find him, well, Falzone's place is empty and the lights are all off, telling Daredevil something is up then. That is when you have Daredevil find the body of Falzone. Someone has shot him in the head, meaning that Sam and Richard could be covering their tracks, or someone is out cleaning the house of the people who betrayed the Kingpin. It's the second choice because we pick up with Vanessa Fisk waiting in a dark room for her son to come home, where Richard Fisk walked in and she knows that Richard Fisk was part of the plan that went down to get rid of her husband. Except you have Vanessa Fisk tell her son that she knew he was a wimp and he was a worthless son to have in this world. He begs for her forgiveness, except you have Vanessa shoot Richard not once but twice. Now this leads to Vanessa going outside and telling the Kingpin's lawyer to make the call. This leads to all the people who helped play a hand in trying to kill the Kingpin being killed by assassins who were sent by Vanessa Fisk. Now, if these men are being killed off, and even Richard Fisk, that means Sam is also a target. And when we pick up with Sam Silk, he is being targeted as well, and people are trying to kill him off, except Sam is able to get away. Now to end this story, Sam runs to the one place where he knows he can get some kind of protection from Vanessa Fisk's men, which was him running to the police, and he tells them everything he knows about the Kingpin, except they want something more than the Kingpin. And so you have Sam offer the one thing he thinks can give him some kind of protection, which is Matt Murdock is Daredevil. Sam Silk tells the police that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and that is where we are going to end today's video. And so guys, please leave me a like down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. Also, any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'm out of here and I'll see you on the next comic book video. Later guys.